Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Hi, everyone. All right. So, Nichiren is living at a time of the shogunate, samurai, right? And it's a fairly new form of government. It's very authoritarian and violent. And as he maintains his steadfast doctrine, his interpretation, his elucidation, his clarity of all of the Buddhist teachings that he studied since he was 12 years old, maybe earlier, but he went into the monk world, the scholarly monk world at the age of 12, left his fishing village, and went into this life of study. At 30 years of age, after much study, much traveling study of all kinds of documents and scriptures, if you will. It's a Western word, but all of these recordings of the Dharma, the teaching, it becomes exceedingly clear to him what the foundational intent is of this thing called Buddhism, and Shakyamuni's, the founders, trying to explain how to achieve this enlightenment as he taught it for some 50 or so years of his life. So he's in a time when the citizenry around him has heard a lot of stories and schools of thought from that, some well established for even centuries, taught from grandparents and parents, so on, that he is in essence correcting. He's saying, you got a lot of it, but you went astray here. These teachings, they took into account a misunderstanding that went that way or this way. And so he is standing up in the midst of a lot of history and a lot of scholarship that is missing the mark. It's incorrect. And he can't let that stand. The teachings themselves say that it's his responsibility not to let that stand. That if you see something that is incorrect, you should correct it. That's your responsibility as a good human being. Certainly as a good Buddhist. You can't just let erroneous views and misperceptions just walk on by you. If they touch your life, it's because it's your life that needs to touch it back. And if it's wrong, then it's your responsibility to correct it. If you don't correct it, it's as though you accept it. And so this is why you must correct it, even if only for yourself. So Buddhism is pretty strict about this, and what Nichiren runs headlong into is that his very act of correction, instead of being appreciated, well, we're human. And humans resist change. Not so much change, but redirection. When humans feel that we get comfortable with habits, we get comfortable with the idea that we know something. And when somebody comes along and says, well, maybe you don't know what you think you know, think about this, our first reaction is, get the hell away from me. What are you talking about? You're a loon. You don't understand. We resist like hell, right? Not all of us, but that's a typical reaction. So certainly with things that, are issues of governance, whether they're personal or cultural, they elicit some pretty strong responses. And in Nichiren's day, what that meant was lots of persecutions, people trying to kill, not just anybody, not just some thug trying to kill him, the government trying to kill him. Exiled several times. So not only is this alarming to himself, and he comes to understand that the reason it's happening is because he is being stalwart. He is demanding that things be corrected. So as much as he doesn't like to go through the persecutions, he also sees them as validation that he's doing it right. He doesn't want to be persecuted, but he understands why, or what motivates the persecutions. But then he's torn because, as you've seen through several of these Go shows, where he's writing letters to people that are close friends and supporters, that they are concerned. They're concerned that, first of all, that their teacher, Nichiren, has his life threatened all the time. So yeah, they're concerned they're going to lose their teacher, right? But on a deeper, more insipid level that Nichiren is quite aware of is that a lot of his converts and a lot of his students may start to really doubt his elucidation, his teaching, his correctness. Because, gosh, if he's so correct about this Buddhism, then why is his life always in danger? Maybe we're not following the right teacher. That's far more cancerous to his followers, far more dangerous. Because if he, as the votary of the Lotus Sutra, doesn't give these people confidence that he's practicing Buddhism correctly, then their possibility of practicing Buddhism correctly becomes sullied. It becomes unstable. And that is actually a worse thing, certainly to Nichiren, than for them to go back to Nembutsu or Zen or something else where they don't feel like they're out of the norm, out of the accepted, and actually put an obstacle in their way to practice correctly. That's far more problematic. So Nichiren does spend quite a bit of time talking about why or how or what the causes are that put him in such peril, so that he can give confidence to not only himself but his students, his followers, right? So all of that is to say that this short Go show, titled "The Votary of the Lotus Sutra Will Meet Persecution," is yet another attempt to assuage the fears of his followers. This letter is meant to be distributed among his followers. We've read others where he was talking to his fellow teachers, his senior students, if you will, his inner circle. But this letter was written for them to disperse, to talk amongst all of the lay believers as well as formal monks about the situation. So, without further ado, let's get into it. He starts, "The fourth volume of the Lotus Sutra states, quote, 'Since hatred and jealousy toward this sutra abound even when the Thus Come One is in the world, how much more will this be so after his passing?' End quote." So how many times have we heard this quote, right? The fifth volume says, quote, "It will face much hostility in the world and be difficult to believe," end quote. The 38th volume of the Nirvana Sutra states, quote, "At that time there will be countless non-Buddhists, quote, ... their hearts gave rise to fury," end quote. It also says, quote, "At that time there will be there were innumerable non-Buddhists who plotted together and went as a group to Ajatasattu, the king of Magadha, and said, quote, "At present there is a man of incomparable wickedness, a monk called Gautama. O king, you have never examined him, and this arouses much fear in us. All sorts of evil people, hoping to gain profit and alms, have flocked to him and become his followers. These people do not practice goodness, but instead use the power of spells and magic to win over men like Mahakashyapa, Shariputra, and Madhyagyana." This, end quote. This well illustrates the meaning of the passage, quote, "Since hatred and jealousy toward this sutra abound even when the thus come one is in the world, ... end quote. So think of this as kind of a meeting in the Sangha for lay believers, new people, and so forth, who are looking upon this situation and wondering, how does Nichiren explain this, right? It goes on. The preceptor Tokuitsu reviled the great teacher Tendai Chiche, saying, "See here, Chi, whose disciple are you? With a tongue less than 3 inches long, you slander the teachings that come from the Buddha's long, broad tongue that can cover even his face," end quote. Tokuitsu also said, quote, "Surely Tendai must be perverse and insane," end quote. More than 300 priests or monks, including the prelates of the 7 major temples in Nara, such as the supervisor of monks Gomyo and the discipline master Keishin, hurled abuse at the great teacher Dengyo, saying, quote, "Just as in a land west of China there was a Brahmin named Demon Eloquence, so now in this eastern realm of Japan there is a shave-pated monk who spits out crafty words. Evil spirits invisibly invite such people to deceive and mislead the world," end quote. However, Dengyo states in his outstanding principles of the Lotus Sutra, quote, "Shakyamuni taught that the shallow is easy to embrace, but the profound is difficult. To discard the shallow and seek the profound is the way of a person of courage. The great teacher Tendai trusted and obeyed Shakyamuni and worked to uphold the Lotus School, spreading its teachings throughout China. We of Mount Hiei inherited the doctrine from Tendai and work to uphold the Lotus School and to disseminate its teachings throughout Japan," end quote. During the lifetime of the Buddha, as well as the 2,000 years of the former and middle days of the law that followed after his passing, there were only 3 votaries of the Lotus Sutra. They were the Buddha himself, Tendai, and Dengyo. By contrast, Shan Wu Wei and Pukung of the True Word School, Tu Shun and Chi Yen of the Flower Garland School, and the teachers of the 3 treatises and Dharma characteristic schools all interpreted the sentences of the Sutra of the true teachings so that they could accord with the meaning of the provisional sutras. Scholars such as Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu inwardly grasped the meaning of the Lotus Sutra but did not outwardly speak of it. Not even the 4 ranks of sages in the former day of the law could compare with Tendai and Dengyo when it came to propagating the Lotus Sutra just as it teaches. And that's an important distinction, because it's easy to read words of a doctrine and then manipulate them to suit your own agenda, rather than to seek deeper meaning and insight into the actual teaching. This happened over and over with many teachings, but certainly in Buddhism, where political power, again I say authoritarianship, political favor was desired amongst these teachers, and so a lot of times teachings were manipulated to appease whether it was an emperor or a king or simply a lord, as is the case in the shogunate times. So Nichiren is feeling these ground swells of cultural manipulation and power buffeting against him as he stands like Dengyo before him, Tendai before him, and Shakyamuni himself, who had raised tremendous shackles in his time with his heretical, teachings. But this is the nature of being the person in the crowd who says, no, 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 the emperor's naked. The emperor's new clothes, if you know that Western fable. I recommend you check it out because it'll give you some very simple, strict insight into what's going on here with Buddhism and in politics in general. People in power tend to want to manipulate things in their favor. So they may use the same words, but they craft them into meaning something other than their original intent. And so this is what Nichiren is talking about here. And he continues, if the Buddha's prediction is true, there must be a votary of the Lotus Sutra in the latter day of the law, and the great difficulties that he encounters will surpass those that occurred during the Buddha's lifetime. The Buddha himself underwent 9 great ordeals. He was slandered by Sundari. He was offered stinking rice gruel. He was forced to eat horse fodder. King Virudaka massacred the greater part of the Shakya clan, which is who Shakyamuni was from. That's why he's called the great Saint Muni of the Shakya clan, Shakya Muni. He went begging, but his bowl remained empty. The Brahman's daughter Chincha slandered him. Devadatta dropped a boulder from atop a hill in an attempt to kill him. And the cold wind forced him to seek robes for protection. And in addition, he was denounced by all the non-Buddhists, as I mentioned earlier. If we go by the prediction in the sutra that hatred and jealousy will be much worse after the Buddha's passing, then Tendai and Dengyo did not fulfill the Buddha's prophecy. In view of all this, it must be that a votary of the Lotus Sutra will appear in the world at the beginning of the latter day of the law, just as the Buddha predicted. In any event, on the 7th day of the 12th month in the 10th year of Bun-e, 1273, a letter from the former governor of Musashi reached the province of Sado. The letter, to which he had set his seal, read, "We have heard a rumor that Nichiren, the monk exiled to the province of Sado, is leading his disciples and others in plotting some evil action. His scheme is nothing short of outrageous. From now on, those who follow that monk are to be severely punished. Should there be those who nevertheless still violate this prohibition, their names are to be reported. This is an official order." So no wonder Nichiren is concerned, right? They're now going to attack his students. Priest Kan-e, the 7th day of the 12th month of the 10th year of Bun-e. To Echi no Rokuro Saimon no Jo. This letter reads, I am, quote, plotting some evil action. So this is a letter he's writing to Shijo Kingo. Non-Buddhists slandered the Buddha, saying that Gautama was an evil man. I, Nichiren, have personally suffered each of the 9 ordeals, the great ordeals. Among them, those of my persecutions that correspond to it, Virudaka massacring the Shaka clan, going begging but being left with an empty bowl, and being forced to seek robes for protection from the cold wind, have been great trials far surpassing those that occurred during the Buddha's lifetime. These are hardships that Tendai and Dengyo never met. Truly, you should know that adding Nichiren to the other 3, there is now a 4th votary of the Lotus Sutra, who has appeared in the latter day of the law. How glad I am to fulfill the words of prophecy from the sutra. How, quote, how much more will there be so after his passing, end quote. How sad I feel that all the people of this country will fall into the Avicii hell. I will not go into detail here, or this letter will become too involved. You should seriously ponder this. Nichiren. So, this is kind of a... Well, there's a postscript here, so let's read the postscript and see. Because Nichiren wrote this letter to be distributed amongst his lay followers, beginning with Shijo Kingo, but others as well. He sent a copy of these letters to several people. In the postscript, he writes, Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu were both scholars who produced a thousand works. However, they expounded only the provisional Mahayana teachings. Though they understood the meaning of the Lotus Sutra in their hearts, they did not declare it in words. An oral transmission exists concerning this. Tendai and Dengyo went so far as to expound it, but they left unrevealed the object of devotion for the essential teaching, the four bodhisattvas, the sanctuary, and the 5 characters of Myoho Renge Kyo. Their reasons were, first, because the Buddha had not transferred these teachings to any of them, and second, because the time was not ripe and the people's capacity was not yet matured. Now that's interesting that he says, I'm going to interject here, first, because the Buddha had not transferred these teachings to any of them. That's an interesting thing to say, because the Buddha, or who we call the Buddha, excuse me, my nose is itching, Shakyamuni transferred his teachings of his entire lifetime to all who would listen. And his teachings, as we know, were taught in levels, stages, levels, degrees, however, whatever. But he was training his followers, right? And in the final 8 years of his life, he taught the Lotus Sutra because, assumably, and by his own word, Shakyamuni made clear that all of his previous teachings were leading up to and culminating in the Lotus Sutra. And it is in the Lotus Sutra where, in the second half of the Lotus Sutra, where he drops this major component of enlightenment in your lifetime, as you presently are, available to anyone who wishes to do it. There's a very simple way to do it. You do it, and you do it with resolve, and resolve is the key issue, because without understanding everything he's taught for 40 years, you simply aren't going to have the capacity to awaken the insight required for you to simply attain your Buddhahood. And this is all in the Lotus Sutra. So this certainly was preached long before Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu and Tendai and so forth, and Dengyo. What Nichiren is alluding to here, as he says, it wasn't, where is it now? Because the Buddha had not transferred these teachings to them, what he's saying is that although they understood it for themselves, they didn't perceive the way to teach it or the way to propagate it correctly. When he follows this sentence up with it wasn't the proper time or the people's capacity. And so he's giving us a clue there that in teaching Buddhism, it was always important to consider who you were teaching and whether, if you gave them a certain teaching, it would cause them too much distress, too much, it would shake them up too much, so that they would then harbor so much doubt that they would quit or leave. So you had to be careful. You had to nurture people along the way until they finally had the capacity to, when you told them, okay, now this is the ultimate practice. They didn't just look at you and go, oh, no way, I can't deal with that, right? So this is what he means when he says transfer the teaching, because the teaching wasn't in their capacity, or in their times, their cultural capacity to broadly propagate it, because the people of the time wouldn't have, they would have shunned it. They would have been afraid of it. They would have resisted it. So it wasn't the time yet. That's what that's all about. Okay? The time was not ripe, and the people's capacity had not yet matured. Now the time has arrived, and the four bodhisattvas will surely make their advent. I, Nichiren, was the first to understand this. It is said that the flight of a bluebird heralds the appearance of the Queen Mother of the West, and that the singing of a magpie foretells the arrival of a guest. In the same way, there are omens announcing the advent of the four bodhisattvas. All of those who consider themselves my disciples should know that now is the time for the four bodhisattvas to appear. Therefore, even if it should cost you your lives, you must never discard your resolute mind and conviction. Toki, Saburo Simon Nojo, Kawanobe, Acharya Yamato, and the rest of you, gentlemen and priests, monks, should read this letter to one another and listen. In this defiled age, you should always talk together and never cease to meditate for your next life. To Kawanobe and his people, Acharya Yamato and the others, all of my disciples and followers, Saburo Simon Nojo, Nichiren, respectfully sent to Toki Jonin. So, there was a lot of consternation at the time. He wrote this from Sado Island, so just his being removed and separated from his students was rather traumatic, and always doubt follows that situation, right? So this is a letter, once again, Nichiren trying to bolster his students' resolve in their own practice. Don't misunderstand or misinterpret this as Nichiren saying, you must devoutly dedicate yourself to me. Nowhere in that does Nichiren say that. Nichiren is constantly the humble man saying, look, here is the truth, here is the clarity. Now is the time to understand this and stay your resolve, stay your conviction, not in Nichiren, but in Buddhism, in the lifespan chapter, in the sutra, in the Myoho Renge Kyo. That is the key. So Nichiren, again, using himself as an example, saying, look, this is, Shakyamuni spoke about this thousands of years ago. And here it is happening. So don't let that slip in your mind. Don't have doubt. It isn't about me. It isn't about me. It's about the proper time and the proper teaching. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Just stick to it, regardless of what happens to me. That's just more proof, right? And you too, and this is the big thing in this letter, you too may be persecuted, because that's the nature of the attachment that non-Buddhists have to their delusions. They don't like somebody poking holes in their delusions, so they're going to respond with violence. So don't look for it, but don't let it keep you from your practice. It's just like any obstacles, right? When we try to do things and we come against something that seems insurmountable, the tendency is to want to just give up, to quit. And Nichiren is saying, don't do that, because those obstacles are proof that you're close to breaking through, that you're on the right path. Don't let those obstacles break you. So it's really a letter of encouragement at a time which is full of violence, right? All right. So enough on that. That's the end of that one. What's the next one? Curious to know. The Swords of Good and Evil. I'm sure I'm going to have my time with terminology on that, but should be interesting. More about struggles and obstacles. It seems like that's all that Buddhism is sometimes, but that's the nature of life. We're easily swept away by convenience, and we forget that there's something much more important than convenience. There is actually experiencing truly our lives, and sometimes that's not convenient, but so what? Life is more important. Namum Myoho Renge Kyo. See you in the next one.